People sentenced in the 80s 2000s. What modern world change shocked you the most? I knew a guy who was in prison from about 1999 or 2000 for about 12-13 years. When he got out he did a few odd jobs for my family. My mum was friends with his parents and was helping him earn money for stuff like mowing the lawn and cleaning etc. While he was over we found that he had no idea how to use Google, how to find a phone number in his phone contacts and barely knew how to send a text message. We helped him out with a few of those skills, but lost touch a while later. I'm not sure where he is these days. I remember helping a guy who went in 2005, got released 2014, had a black and green AudioVox phone in his effects and asked where he could activate it. I had to explain that it wouldn't be happening lol. Like 3 months later, you know, I like the iPhone but I'm gonna wait for the release of the newest one. Adapted pretty quick. I mean, you would. When I first saw my real smartphone, the iPhone 3GS, back in 2008, I didn't freak out and think it was magic or anything. It was really freaking cool and I had one within a few months, but still, if he went away in 2005 he probably knew the BlackBerry was a thing. There was that documentary of someone who was sentenced in the 70s, Otis I think, and he just couldn't believe the stuff he was seeing. Since he lived in New York, with all the screens it was just a different city then, all the different colored drinks and people wearing earphones like they were in the Secret Service. It's an interesting thing to watch. I hired a guy that was released after 17 years circa 2005. A week after he started working he bought a phone. He had a childlike wonder with push-to-talk and texting. A week later he was off that he couldn't text his order into Hungry Howie's. TBH, valid thing to be off about. I remember getting the bus years ago and this old bloke got on heading away from town center towards the more residential areas. Without a second thought he sparked up a cigar. One of the passengers told him you can't smoke on a bus. He apologized and quickly stubbed it out but said he got discharged from prison that day, and when he went in you could smoke anywhere you wanted, so this was a massive culture shock to him. You have been sentenced to 10 years for smoking on the bus, or frick. A co-worker a few years ago had spent 10 years in jail. He got out right when Bluetooth headsets for phones were huge. He'd talk about all the random conversations he thought people were trying to have with him, and smartphones freaked him the heck out. Knew a guy who was blown away by digital cameras. He had purchased an old, terrible one and couldn't get over how amazing it was. Cameras truly have come a long way, and here people on Instagram trying to find 15-30 years old cameras for aesthetic. Prisoner transfer I did one time for this man who was sentenced to life in 1968, and it's the first time he'd driven past the CN Tower in Toronto and he couldn't believe how tall it was. That and he was blown away by how many different car brands there were. Frick, 1968 is a long time. Got a call from a woman filing a claim on some abandoned funds. I got all her information and then asked for an email address and she said, "What's email? I keep hearing about it, but you've got to understand I've been in prison a long time." My cousin's husband, that she married while he was serving 10 years beginning around 2008, wanted the first thing he did as a free man was to go to Hollywood Video and rent movies to watch with her. Then she blew his mind with Netflix. At least the idea of Netflix and chill wasn't far from his original plan, but he was shocked about there not being video stores anymore. Not me, but my father. I remember him trying to flip a CD upside down and put it back into the CD player like you would do with a record because it was skipping. Didn't notice how much of a big deal that must have been to him at the time. Adjusting to life on the outside can be really tough. My friend's elder brother was jailed in 1994 and served 15 years. He said when he went in, anyone with an in-car phone was super rich, and to then see absolutely everyone have a completely cordless, pocket-sized phone was amazing. He also said that all the TV adverts had websites to visit, or were for completely online stores, which were a bit of an alien concept, as he'd never really seen or used the internet. He also found the chip and pin process of paying for things on a bank card extremely exciting. If he's impressed by chips and pins, wait until tap comes your way. No pin, just the card held to debit machine until you hear a beep. I was talking to a lady who runs the education for a federal prison in Florida. She said when they start getting rambunctious or off topic, she mentions a new feature of the newest iPhone and all of a sudden they're very interested in what she has to say again. That's pretty clever. I asked a friend what the hardest thing was for him readjusting to being free again. This is a roundabout of what he said. Closing doors. I'd leave the fridge open every time without fail for months. You're not allowed to open or shut anything for yourself, and I'd accidentally let the pets outside by forgetting I needed to close the front door someone else had opened in front of me. You forget the last one in rule act and have to learn it all again. What was the thing you found you liked the most? Candy Crush gets phone back out and starts playing. 5 minutes later exclaimed they've leveled up excitedly. So sweet. I represented a guy who had been in jail for 12 years. He got out around 2006. I asked him what the first thing he did was. He said I went to a McDonald's and changed my clothes. I asked him what the best part of being out was, and he said doing whatever I want, whenever I want, without asking permission, like taking a shower or going to sleep. I'll never forget this. I tell this story often. I remember being in 8th grade when the U-scan machines first Kroger. I remember them being the first to have it in Louisville, KY. Anyway, I had grabbed some milk and some other BS. And this dude was standing in line with some items, but he was just staring at people using the U-scans. Finally, after watching people use it and my turn had arrived, he approached me and said, "Sorry my man, I don't mean to bother you, but I just served 20 years in prison and I don't know what I'm looking at. So I'll let him go ahead of me," and walked him through it. He was crazy appreciative about something I wouldn't have thought 2 seconds about. It was that moment I realized how badly America's prison systems were failing its citizens. They're expected to be able to be tossed back into society with no new marketable skills, no social integration, no clue on the applications of new technology, all while not going back to jail. Crap is freaking dumb. A friend said his dad's friend tried VR after about 30 years in prison for like 2nd-degree murder or something, and he got scared, fell over and broke the headset. Not my personal experience, but a man I worked with after he was released from prison after being sentenced as a young adult was blown away by the touchscreen ordering at Huawei and could not fathom why the employees could not take an oral order from him. I remember when I was about 8 or 9 using my first touchscreen in an office my friend's mum worked in. It was crap and hard to use. I thought it was amazing and futuristic. I often think back to that moment and marvel at how much they've improved and how I used one every day. Anthony Ray Hinton described people walking around looking at down these things in their hands, phones, and amazingly not bumping into each other. OW, on the day you were released, your best friend, Lester, who had visited you every single week for nearly 30 years, picked you up. You'd been behind bars since 1985. So you got in his car, and what was the first thing you wanted to do? RH. Lester thought I'd want to get something decent to eat, but I wanted to go where they laid my mother's body. I see him messing with the radio dial. Then we start driving down the road. I heard this little white lady say, "In 1/10 of a mile, turn right." I jumped and said, "What the heck? OW, you thought there was a white lady in the car?" RH, yes. And Lester's laughing so hard he has to pull over. He says, "That's a GPS," when he explained what it does. It really hit me how long I'd been locked up. The world had changed. I just wanted to commend what great friendship those people had. Every single week for 30 years. Dang. I hope I find a friend like that. I heard a guy talking about this who was sentenced in the 70s and got out in maybe 2015. One thing was he thought everyone was walking around talking to themselves. Then someone explained to him that they were talking the phone with the little things in their ears. The other was that he got up to give his seat to a much younger woman on the subway and she argued with him and wouldn't take the seat when he insisted. I think eventually she did, but it upset the guy that women wouldn't take a seat when he offered, even though he was pretty old and grey by this point. But it's no fun getting the stink eye for sitting while there is an elderly person standing. New passengers won't know the situation. My friend just came home 2 weeks ago, and I tried to prepare him the best I knew how for the excessive use of cell phones by everyone. I explained that he's going to be amazed by the amount of people glued to looking at their phone 24/7. in the store, in the car, on the sidewalk, sitting in the house watching TV, like literally all the time. I also let him know that the technology is going to be really different since he went in over 13 years ago, so cell phones were still flip phones and definitely not as interactive, touchscreens, and internet accessible. Needless to say, the second day home he called me angry as frick. LOL, he hated how he felt stupid and how he felt like a child because he could barely figure out how to call someone, let alone video chat FaceTime. At one point he couldn't figure out how our phone call ended up on the radio when his friend turned on the car. He didn't like having his kids teach him how to use the technology and just was getting really discouraged. Basically, reiterating the feeling stupid mentality. I just tried to reassure him that when we all were exposed to this technology, we had to learn it, and many people forget what it was like to not know how to use something like a smartphone. We take for granted how we learned something and how we were once new to a process. Today it seems he's being more patient with himself, but it is a daily struggle and one I try to be positive and kind to him so he knows, if no one else, at least he can rely on call on me to just listen to him vent. Having your kids teach you is an ego killer. Not me, but my older brother was in prison from 2006 to 2011 and he was shocked that all the TVs had gone to flat screen. He also missed the advent of iPhones, so he assumed all these flat screen TVS laptops were all touchscreen like the iPhones were. My brother was locked up for a long time. When he got out he wanted to go to the roller rink, because that's what you did when he was convicted. He did not understand the rollerblades that were everywhere and that most skaters now just cruised through the park. He was sad when we went to the roller rink and most of the people there were wearing rollerblades and that there were only a few people. This place used to be packed. Sorry buddy, that was 30 years ago. That's actually a little sad. Imagine one of your favorite places in your youth becoming little more than a ghost town. My dad would always tell me stories, like how he got out, walked into Walmart, and ended up crying because he didn't have to ask to use the restroom. A couple other family members did really long time and couldn't use the bathroom without asking permission. Obviously not the same thing, but in my school in the last 2 years you no longer had to ask permission to use the bathroom, you could just get up and go. Everyone felt like they were breaking the law for the first couple of months. Not me, but one of the most astounding changes I hear one of my dad's friends talking about is how having big asses was shameful and all models were flat. Now it's the other way around. So mix-a-lot's impact, I'd assume. At college, I bumped into a guy at a bus stop who did 20 years and had just gotten out the previous week. He struck up the conversation by talking about cell phones, and how it was that we could talk with anyone by staring at a computer we could fit in our pocket. The concept baffled him. I had to explain the concept of why texting can be easier than calling. He told me that the thing that surprised him most, however, was how awful it was to watch the news. He hadn't been able to watch TV behind bars, and so was amazed and disappointed at how partisan and ridiculous news shows had become. For dad, it was prices. My dad's the sort who can tell you what he paid for this shirt, in this brand, on this year, and he has not gotten over the fact that all his favorite brands are gone or gone to crap and everything costs an absurd amount of money. Half of our conversations are just him going, that costs $$, but it used to cost $, and the usual dad stuff about how everything has holes in it or it's too thin, etc. But he's more taken aback than anything. He's taken to using internet deals price matching, but he still thinks he can talk his way into a deal at retail stores armed with nothing much, but that's way more expensive than that should be. I can't tell if he really used to be able to talk retail shops down in price because that was a thing, or if he used to be just that charming. According to everyone who knew him back when, probably that charming. Technology gave him a spin too, but it's the prices he's stuck on. Someone needs to tell him about inflation. Obligatory, not me, but in the early 2000s I worked with a guy that was sentenced in the mid 80s and had just come out. He told me the first time he went to a men's room he spent several minutes looking for the handle to flush. Motion sensor toilets was completely alien to him. Motion sensor toilets is still completely alien to me. I thought you meant he didn't know what to do with the button flush, or the 3 seashells. My first job I worked with this guy who went to prison for a long time. I think he was on parole at the time. Dude made some pretty messed up choices, selling ancient coke. I think he threatened to murder his ex-wife. Anyway, this was around 2012 and we chatted often. When the radio played in the store he would only sing the songs from the 90s. I always thought it was because he liked that music the most. Nope. That was the last music he heard before going to prison for years. He didn't know what Google was. He didn't know YouTube. What's a Facebook? Never heard of Twitter. He barely knew how to operate the internet at all. It was so shocking to me to meet someone who was much older than me. I wanna say late 30s, early 40s, and not know these things. Anytime I hear Hootie and the Blowfish or Blues Traveler I always see his face in my mind, just singing along. He had a really good attitude with things. He really wanted to put himself on the right track and I hope he did. I wonder what happened to him. He always had something funny to say about something. Good sense of humor. I really hope he got his life together and is somewhere good, and that he's found out that YouTube is a goldmine for cat videos. What happened with Legos? They used to be simple. Oh come on. I know you know what I'm talking about. Legos were simple. Something happened out here while I was inside. Harry Potter Legos. Star Wars Legos. Complicated kits. Tiny little blocks. I mean I'm not saying it's bad, I just wanna know what happened. They still make Boxo bricks where it's Legos with no dedicated kit. They do come with a possibilities book though. They also have Lego Junior for kids ages 5-8 that aren't super complicated and have slightly bigger bricks. It's much smaller than Duplo but still easy for a little kid. I worked in a toy store last year. My late husband was absolutely blown away that he could order food to be delivered to him. We lived in a big city so anything he wanted he could get it. He was so used to Chinese food being the only thing that he was just mind blown. It made his house arrest a lot easier. My brother did 5 years for driving under the influence and Grand Theft Auto. When he came out he was blown away by the PlayStation 4. He was massively disappointed by the PS3 and had kept his PS2, but he was hella excited for the new console, said the graphics were incredible. He played the new GTA on it, which in retrospect wasn't as funny as he thought. My cousin was in jail from 2002 and was released this year. I went to his house and caught him up on some political history in the past decade with YouTube videos and his mind was already blown by YouTube. He was kind of disappointed he missed Obama's presidency. He was in prison at 17 years old so I caught him up a little on the pop culture he missed also with YouTube videos. Netflix and Hulu made him really excited to catch up on shows he never got to finish. His teenage daughter showed up and we showed him how to FaceTime her. When she left he cried because he could see and talk to her whenever he wanted instead of imagining what her face looks like over a phone call. That's freaking wholesome, man. My uncle was in jail for a long time for carjacking, drug-related stuff, and impersonation of a police officer. Can't remember how long he was in for, but he got out around 2013 or 2014 I think. I remember him telling me about a song he hadn't heard in years so I pulled it up on YouTube. He was in absolute disbelief. I told him it could find any song, and he took it as a challenge. So I looked up song after song for him and he'd play a guitar to almost all of them. I'm not particularly fond of my uncle, but that was a pretty neat moment. No longer having to go to a friend's house to play video games together, and the fact that everyone has cell phones now means you don't have to go to a friend's house and hope they're home. Also, computers. Everyone has some sort of computer in their home or access to one. I remember being told that I needed to learn cursive because all your papers are done in blue or black ink in cursive once you get to high school. My mom taught me cursive in first and I never ended up using it because my school started teaching us how to type in 3rd grade. By the time I reached middle school, we were turning in typed papers. I was pretty surprised at the rise of e-commerce. I never thought it would be more convenient than a brick and mortar store. I was sentenced to some community service in 1997 for a traffic violation. The world up and got itself in a big dang hurry. Someone in my family was sentenced 30 years in prison for smuggling. When he was out, he told my uncle he have a stash of brand new Pegas and they were extremely well preserved, and they can make big money for just selling them. I work at a bank and got a call a while ago from a guy that was in jail since the 90s. He needed help with setting up his banking app. but the call ended up being just a 45-minute conversation about how to use his phone. He said the rapid advancements in technology really messed with him, and he was having a hard time making sense of it all. My dad once hired a dude who just got out of prison to work with him for a day. He got in somewhere in the late 80s and was released early 10s. It was like 2 months after he got out, and my dad said jokingly told him, "I bet you were surprised when you heard about Michael Jackson." He said yeah, his death was a real tragedy. My dad said no, the kid diddling thing. My dad said he never saw such shock on a person when he showed him the articles. Dude was probably still getting over the fact that people could bring up articles on their pocket slab devices in a few seconds too. A friend's dad said he couldn't believe how crude and boisterous women have become. He went to town for a night out drinking and he said something like they were shouting, swearing and throwing up in the street. He tried to talk to a group of girls who replied with "frick off granddad." He also can't get his head around the amount of people taking photos of themselves. This is in the UK BTW. I am gonna guess the north of England, or Scotland, all of Scotland. I had a seasonal job as a security guard at an annual festival in a park. My job was mainly to talk to people about when the festival opened, facts about it, etc. One day this dude walks right up to me, but I didn't notice because I was on my phone. This guy was listening to The Dark Necessities by RHCP on a CD player, which I thought was weird because it was like 2016. He started telling me about how he has been in jail for like 10 or 12 years for coke and how excited he was to be free and that this festival was still going on after all those years he had been locked up. He kept staring at my smartphone and it wasn't until after he left that I started to piece together that this dude had totally missed the introduction of smartphones and so many other technological advancements. The lack of non-mobile phones probably. I remember thinking a car phone was the biggest leap ever as a kid. We had one in a second-hand Oldsmobile, but the monthly bill was so high that it was never working. But we had a phone in the car. Blew my 6-year-old brain. My brother bought a car phone and blew my mind. He had a battery pack that fit inside a shoulder bag so you could take the phone out of the car. You could make a phone call from anywhere and only had to carry a small 5 pounds battery. A very distant relative got out due to old age after serving almost his entire life for train robbery. He didn't trust that salt from the sea. I heard of a guy who did 20+ years and when he got out he was staring at people using an ATM. He was legit astonished that money was coming out of the wall. Mine's not as extreme as most here, but 2 things got me most when I came home. Locked up in 2008, got out 2016. Drink machines and clothing. The drink machines, you tap the screen and it brings you through a whole menu of options about different flavors of soda and such. I had never seen anything like it and it took me a while to learn to get through the choices. Clothing. Suddenly all the pants options come up to my ribcage and everything is see-through. I shop in the dude sections now. My uncle is still in prison but I believe his release is coming up soon. He married my aunt after he was incarcerated and he's told her that he wants no part in technology. I think he went in summer of 1999. My aunt's already told him she's getting him a phone but that it's going to be the most basic Nokia brick she can find because he's terrified. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.